Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I, of course, am Brigid. Today we have it's a very nice day out today, actually. As we all know, it's been stormy and rainy, and I've probably talked about that to no end to some degree. And good morning, Melissa. So now we finally got a morning that is a bit calmer. And I noticed my neighbor's light did not keep going on. I think the wind was actually causing that to happen. So thankfully the wind has died down and that has stopped. But it's been, this has been an interesting kind of last week that we've had here in May with a lot of different things going on. And the topic that came to me this morning when I was doing my morning meditations and so forth. I've been trying to be much better about doing my integrated Amrita meditation in the morning because that really does help center me for the whole day. Some interesting things came up yesterday. I did a podcast, not a podcast. I did a live stream yesterday on Ketonia, which is what I normally do it on Mondays. I did it a little bit later. I was still trying to get some things organized. Last night I finally put the tarot videos up for the transition, it's called Liminal Tarot, but the channel that's connected to this, those videos are now up for Libra through Pisces. I did that last night. I finally finished those up and got them up. But, I've got a lot that's been out of work I had to do. I was behind because of having 2 days with no electricity. So I'm slowly catching up with things. And the topic that I had talked about yesterday, because I did a podcast on the harpies, okay, because Ketonia is about these kind of feminine figures that are kind of dark with connection to mythology and folklore and things like that in particular. And as part of it, what I ended up talking about on the live stream was the whole mythology and folklore around the crone or the hag. Okay, so we talk about that kind of thing. And interestingly, this morning, what came up, and good morning, Sam. What came up for me this morning in terms of what I wanted to talk about today, I pulled 2 cards from this deck, and they were Aloneness and Guilt, which I thought was really interesting. So basically, we're looking at the Hermit and the Eight of Swords, and so I looked at it and I said, okay, so then what we're thinking about today is guilt about aloneness. Okay, so there's an interesting topic, and I think that's actually, given the full context of things, I think that's almost a uniquely female kind of a topic. Even though there are probably, actually, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for men to know about either, because a lot of times I feel like, it's just like with anything. When you're not in a particular situation, you don't necessarily know how it goes, or you don't know what somebody goes with. One of the reasons that when I do Ketonia, a lot of people say, well, you could talk about race issues and connected with this as well. I said, yes, but I'm not a person who experiences race issues, except in the sense of, and I only particularly notice this when I'm dealing with people who are from India or Dubai or other places like that. I see that's where I really see white privilege come in. Because I feel like those are the times when, where I've actually had people say to me, well, it's okay that you do it because you're a white person, or, well, it's you got divorced, oh, well, that's okay because, that happens, but if you're from their culture, no, you can't, that's not okay. I remember being told, oh, you should come to Dubai. I mean, you're a white American woman, you'll get work. They don't want to give the natives work, but they'll give you work. I've heard things like this. So I see how that is, but I cannot talk about race from the point of view of somebody who is from, who is either of African descent or who is of, some other kind of descent, from India, Asia, other places where I don't, that's not who I am. So similarly, a lot of times men, even if men want to be, even if men want to be sympathetic or empathetic to women's views, it's really not something that's very easy for them to do because they're not women. That's the bottom line. If you're not experiencing it, it's really, that's, again, experience versus intellect, right? You can only intellectualize what that might be for somebody. So it's not, I don't think it's always a bad thing to talk about these things, even though they seem to be, some of them maybe seem more female geared, and my audience seems to be split between men and women. So So I don't want to, but this was the topic that came up today, was this topic of female aloneness and the fact that there was guilt around it. And I think the reason that this topic came up for me is because a lot of what I'm kind of dealing with lately is the fact that, I'm making some money at my business, not really quite enough, and keep feeling like frustrated, like, if I had a spouse, if I was in a, if I went back and got a regular job, which given some of my circumstances is really hard for me to do at this point because I can't drive to a job right now, like on a regular basis. Once in a while is okay, but on a regular basis, it would be a difficulty for me. And even trying to find remote work just to kind of fill in is actually quite difficult because there's a lot of scam work out there. So you have to be really, really careful with that. And obviously I feel like whatever work I'm spending my time on I want it to be something that is not going to be all consuming and take me away from the work that I feel I'm supposed to be doing here. But struggling to kind of make it on your own, as a female, it's interesting because what came up is like there's almost a guilt about it. And this guilt, okay, there's really two places that this kind of guilt can come from. And I think women might experience it to a certain degree because obviously, when we're talking about female sovereignty, okay, females being, in charge of themselves, in charge of their own decisions, which was a topic that came up yesterday. And I should mention the other thing that kind of makes this topic front and center is I have images on my wall, and you can't see them from here, but this is on my altar space. I have my two main guides, and one of my guides is Azrael, who I've talked about, and the other is Macha, okay, who is one of the embodiments of Goddess Morrigan in Ireland. And she is the one that's connected with sovereignty, with fertility, with the plane, with things like that. She's the one that, these are both the guides that seem to want to work with me. Well, I had a random thing again happen yesterday where her picture fell off the wall. Remember I talked about Azrael's picture flew off the wall a few days ago, last week, or I don't even know how long ago it was now. But Maka's picture not only fell off, but the ring that I have that I mentioned, I have my two guide rings, my guide ring flew off and disappeared as well, and I had to find it. And I thought, oh, that's definitely a message about something. And again, there was other things that, I was thinking about, which I won't, discuss here, but it's, but I feel like there's a lot of these questions around female sovereignty. And one of the ones that comes up is there's almost a guilt that you feel for doing things on your own. Like, in other words, society has this idea that the woman is supposed to be, that the feminine exists in relationship, right? That you exist in relationship. And I guess the reality is we all exist in relationship. Even if we're doing things on our own, we're not really alone. You're not living in an island somewhere off the grid. I mean, we're not alone. We definitely are part of society. We are part of a network. But a lot of times with women, the feeling is that, well, you should be like the traditional idea is that you should be supporting a man in some way. Now in most marriages today, I don't. I don't really think that's viable in most marriages today. Women and men generally have to contribute financially to the relationship. Maybe you'd be lucky enough to have somebody who would fully support you, but then there can be issues with that as well. If you end up having someone who fully supports you, and then it turns around, I've heard about this happening. This happened a lot to women in the 80s, and then their husband did some kind of a dirty business deal or something, and maybe didn't pay taxes for years or something, and then he leaves. Now when she does her taxes, she's the one who ends up being in trouble, and she says, well, I don't know, my husband managed everything, and then they'd say, well, too bad, you're supposed to be aware of it. So there's a problem with yielding all of that. I mean, that's just one problem, but you can't yield all of that to somebody else too. It has to be a partnership. Both people have to be involved. But as I've talked many times about the difficulties in relationships, because from an early age, we're not really taught how to relate to each other. It becomes, there's still a script that goes on of men who, first of all, a lot of men who are physically driven, and who get involved with women, again, because no matter what is said, sometimes there's the expectation that once you get married, that basically like, okay, now you're just going to take the place that my mother took. You're going to clean up after me, and I'm going to continue to do my thing. I had that with my husband. That was the thing. And that's a problem too when you're a woman who has a lot of sovereignty, and independence, because men say, oh, look, yeah, she's good. She can take care of herself. So she can take care of my stuff too. And that's kind of the feeling, like, oh, well, you take care of my stuff, and then I can go off and do whatever I feel like doing, which doesn't work. That's just not a way to do things. But that's an unconscious thing. When I was dating this person before we got married, I never would have had any idea that he would have been like that after marriage. Okay, so it's only something that has to do with that kind of projection. So there's a lot of reasons too, and now in this day and age, why women prefer to just do things on their own. It'd be nice to have a relationship that worked, but in the absence of that, you do your own thing. But it's weird because there's almost a guilt about that, and that guilt may actually be ancestral to some degree, because if we come from a background of people where it was, this goes back even to the ancient ideas. I've talked about this in one of my books about what I call, when I'm talking about the Greek, I was talking about oikos versus polis. Okay, when you had societies that were tribal, when it was based on tribal families. When you read these old Greek epics like the Iliad or something like that, all of them generals they're all actually individual kings. You're not talking about a united Greece fighting a united Troy. They're all individual tribal kings who have kind of taken a pledge to support this other king when his wife gets stolen from him. So that's really where this war comes about. And so but there are all these individual tribal lineages, and this is why a lot of times you'll hear about these heroes as like, oh, their father was Zeus, or was this one or that one, or some god, because it made it seem like their family lineage was something spectacular. Yes, I'm a demigod, so therefore I should be king. That kind of thing. So the lineage was important, and that's why a lot of times you saw these things about the control of female sexuality in particular. It was this idea that the woman is to, there were all kinds of scary stories around what would happen if you died without having children. There was all kinds of scary stories about women who don't have children. It's really interesting if you dive into it. Of course, like I said, that's the subject of the podcast, so I'm not really diving into it here. But it occurred to me that there are times when if you are trying to make it on your own as an independent woman, that there may be times, again, depending on your family and your family background and situation, that you may feel this sort of, even if your family doesn't say anything to you, even if it seems like tacitly they support you, sometimes you might get the things here and there. With me, I always get the thing with my mother of saying, like, never to me really, maybe sort of sometimes, but mainly to my sister and to other people, like, oh, she doesn't have a 9-to-5 job, so she can't possibly make it. She can't possibly do something like this on her own. It's not possible for her to do this. And even though I just kind of say, yeah, whatever, I don't really take a lot of what she says to heart at this point, because of there's a long thing behind that, which I won't get into here, but I don't really take that very much to heart. But nonetheless, I always feel like there's still like the kind of this almost ancestral thing about what your role is. We expected you. When I grew up, it was like basically the assumption was, well, yeah, you're going to get married and have a family. Of course, that's what you're going to do. You're female. It's you have the parts. That's what they do. And so when you don't do that, then it becomes like, well, and then I think a lot of women do run into this, and I see stories about this all the time, about feeling like the fact that somehow, or women alternately who get into that kind of a situation, who say, well, okay, this is what my family, or this is what we do. So I got married, I had the child, and then, as I think I was talking a little bit about yesterday, that the difficulties that people can have with that sometimes, because it is a major transition to have a child, to make the decision to bring somebody into the world and to take care of them. And unfortunately, there's a lot of times where that happens in a case where sometimes you have a woman who gets married because, well, that's what I'm supposed to do and I'm supposed to have the kid. And then once she has the child, it's like, oh, maybe this is not what I wanted. Maybe this is not, well, it's too late. You can't, there's no refunds. You can't send a child back. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is the child will be the one that ends up suffering. The child ends up getting this kind of collateral damage from decisions that might be unconsciously made because, that's just what you're supposed to do. But there's that sense of duty, that this is your duty to society, to, as a female. And if you don't do that, if you don't want to do that, if you're not inclined to do that, sometimes women can't do that. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them. There's just, the female body is a mystery. And the way that those parts work is not, with the things I hear these days about the female reproductive system are quite amusing in a way, if they weren't terrifying in some ways. But there's really a very slim understanding, generally speaking, about how the female body works, about how pregnancy works, about how all of that stuff, and about how all of those organs work. I've always said that I've been at war with my uterus since I was a child. I mean, it's never been, we have never been friends. And I just thought, no, I'm not, I definitely was not going to be reproducing under those circumstances. It's just like, no. So it's, we all have our challenges, and probably there's more people that have challenges than don't in a lot of ways. But there can be, when you make the decision that no, this is the decision I'm making. That's not the path for me. I'm going to draw my own path, and I'm going to, and also on top of it, because obviously you can get a job, right? You can get skills, you can get a job. When you decide to strike it out on your own and say, no, I want to do something that's more authentic to me, even if it's not part of this other, that's the other piece of it. Like, it's like in this case, like what I'm doing, there's a lot of people who do what I do. But socially speaking, it's almost like, oh, well, like I used to do systems work. Well, that's really what you should be doing because that's where the money is, right? That's what you should be doing. But when the heart says, no, that's not where I want to spend my time and energy, and that's not what I'm going to do. So again, there's that feminine thing of following the heart rather than what logic tells you should be doing, and as a good citizen who's building their bank account or whatever it is that they're doing. So then the guilt starts to come on, almost like, well, see, if you had followed one of the traditional paths, if you had gotten married and gotten supported by a husband, which, by the way, marrying somebody is no guarantee you're going to be supported by anybody. My spouse assumed I was going to support him, which that was never discussed before we were married, but that was the assumption. And or if you feel if you. Because you didn't follow the traditional path, because you didn't follow, even like I said, as much as I talk about Joseph Campbell, and I love Joseph Campbell's stuff, he also is somebody who will say, well, a woman fulfills her destiny by having children. And I'm like, well, no, she doesn't. I mean, she could. I mean, that could be the thing that a female offers to the world is another person. That's, sure. I mean, if that's what someone says, oh, I want to be a mom and I'm going to do, great. Yes, absolutely. 100%. But then the people who don't, it's almost like, well, what else do you have to offer? Like, well, actually quite a lot. But sometimes I think there's, when we talk, okay, so we're talking about unconscious scripts here. We're not talking about, necessarily, the fact that we think these things as part of a regular course. Like, I don't sit there saying, oh yeah, well, I guess I should go back to the job because that's what society expects of me. I mean, we don't think that way typically. Typically we're like, yeah, right, whatever. But at the same time, sometimes this stuff can come up in dream work. That's what I said. A lot of times you can see these things start to come out and again, these are ancestral patterns. There's a lot of discussion about how this can be ingrained in our DNA. And there's a lot of studies about, because obviously DNA, we talk about, look out if you have heart disease, or if you're prone to breast cancer, or if you're prone to this or prone to that. I mean, we all talk about physical ailments in our DNA. But one of the things also is it seems like that emotional trauma and damage is also coded into our DNA. And especially if there's been a point in, and probably, I mean, unless you belong to like some aristocratic family that's like multimillionaires or billionaires or whatever, seems very unlikely. Most of us somewhere in our past have some kind of family trauma, maybe around scarcity. People say who lived through the Great Depression in the United States, for example, which a lot of my family did. And I have also ancestors who came over during the famine, the Irish famine as well. So there's a lot around scarcity there. That gets built into your DNA. And I mean, I'm just talking about me. There are probably thousands, probably millions of other people like me who have this kind of a situation. And it's a unique challenge because you're dealing with something that's not only unconscious, but seems to be somehow part of your coded ancestry, so to speak. So that's only one type of problem. There are other issues that we can have. It could be issues around anxieties. Even if you have everything that you need and everything's fine, you can still have anxieties about things. You have money and then it's like, well, I still don't have enough money. I have to make sure I have a ton of money because maybe, again, if there was a time in the past where your parents were living on the street and had nothing or, were, making, 5 cents a week, then maybe you're feeling like, oh, I have to make sure. That I think is where my mother comes from because she grew up very, very poor and she had to, she actually dropped out and went to work at the age of 16 because it was just, and then that's where she met my father. But there's different things that people go through, so therefore there's different scripts that kind of get impressed upon you when you come into this world, and they can be impressed upon you socially just through family interactions and what everybody takes for granted as how things are supposed to be. But then there's also the stuff that seems to be and I don't like to use the word hardwired because one thing we've talked about, especially with meditation, is just because something is in your DNA doesn't mean your DNA can't be changed. It can be, but it's hard. This is why often meditation, the studies that they've done on meditation is that meditation that's practiced regularly. I think they had done this study on Tibetan monks, and they were showing that there was actually a significant change in not only brain activity, but there seemed to be, cellular level change as well from moving towards that one-pointedness of the mind, right? But I think in the process, as we move towards that kind of healing, we have, all of those kind of wounds can come up. And that was just an interesting one that came up. I thought, wow, that idea of guilt over saying, well, I didn't get married and have a child, and I didn't continue to work 14 hours a day and push myself to go to a job that I couldn't drive to anymore because my body was saying no. But society and my family is saying, oh, but you should have just kept pushing yourself. And so in those cases, a lot of times, even if we actually do have support, we might feel very unsupported in what we're doing. We may come into these things where we suddenly have feelings of aloneness in the sense of, wow, nobody has my back on anything, which again is probably not true, but there's an emotional response there that has to be kind of looked at and dealt with. Because the realities often are, and Carl Jung used to talk about this in therapies, where when he would have patients, particularly female patients, who would talk about this feeling of being totally alone. And it might not necessarily have been for these reasons. There was a time, like I said, when women just got divorced. That was a terrible, terrible thing. Now, divorce rate's 50%. So, people get divorced all the time. And fundamentally, nobody is bad for making a decision that's outside of the tradition or the norm. That's something that you can do and that you can work towards. But I think when you feel like you're carrying an awful lot on your own shoulders, which I'm not going to lie to you, I do feel a lot of the time, darn, I wish I had somebody else to kind of carry some of this, but the bottom line is ultimately, if you followed that kind of through to its conclusion, you say, well, are you always going to be happy with that? Is that always going to be a result that's going to work for you? Maybe, maybe not. So we face these kinds of things, but I just felt like I needed to bring up this kind of unique challenge that we might have. Like I said, even if we're very independent, we're very intelligent, we've got the credentials, we've got all of that kind of stuff, we may be establishing ourselves in some way. If we're functioning without that spousal support or some other kind of financing from somewhere, it can be, it can bring up issues of that. It can bring up that kind of mental roundabout of feeling of overanalysis and thinking well, maybe I should have done it this way, right? But ultimately, it's that's why I think the courage card was coming up a lot. It's kind of trying to push through and say, okay, there's stuff that's going to be happening. speaking of stuff happening, I just saw the guy going by with the road closed signs. They're actually going to repave my road today. So, yeah, it's like there is something going on out there today. But there's just this feeling here of, I thought it was just interesting that came up, because I can tell you in all the years I've been doing this, that's never a thought that I've had, that, I should feel some guilt for not doing it a certain way. But I said probably somewhere in that coded script that feeling is there, like, well, why didn't you do it this way? And I already know why I didn't do it that way. But sometimes these things can come up and be almost a little bit of a gotcha. And I think I bring it up on this channel because I feel like this is something that we contend with as we're going through transitions, especially as we're moving into new space, pioneering new territory, so to speak. The Sirius card in Cartouche a lot of times is about pioneering. It's about doing something new. We're looking in the future. And now when we talk about looking to the future, we talk about technology and AI and things like this. But pioneering may also just be saying, no, just pioneering our way through recoding our DNA to a different expectation. And I think it's slowly happening. I don't think it's something that happens overnight in a society, but I think it's good to have an awareness, especially for women who are doing their own thing or trying to authentically do their own thing, that this can be something that you struggle with or contend with. But it's not bad to struggle and contend with these things. It's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're kind of working through these different these are the things that we discover along the way. You uncover what's hidden there, and as you uncover it, you end up having to look at things in a new way. And interesting, I'm just saying that. And now let's look at our reading for today, because our first card here is stress. This is the 7 of Wands. Now, I've had this card before. This is this guy up here. He's playing like all these instruments and blowing his horn and trying to juggle all of these like lit candles and things, and while balancing on a balloon. So that's the act. That's the overwhelmedness. Like I've got to carry it all. I've got to do it all. Okay, and that may be some sense of where that kind of feeling can come from. But you got the little monkey here ready to pop the balloon, and that's the unpredictability of life. There, anything could happen to pop that balloon. And sometimes I feel like life pops the balloon for you to kind of tell you, like, you don't need to carry all this stuff. Put some of this down. Don't take this all so seriously. And the inner feeling of which you're unaware is the experiencing card. Yeah, what we were talking about, intellect versus experience. Now, this is the 3 of Wands. So they're talking about this like this is a woman hugging a tree. So it's the idea of experiencing nature, of experiencing life. But 3 of Wands is also a card of collaboration, of recognizing that you are not isolated in the system, that you are, in fact, with others. And this is like experiencing the world rather than being alienated from it in some way, in some kind of an intellectual way. And the external feeling of which we're aware here is the Ace of Cups, which is the go with the flow card, okay? And so I think this is saying that there are things that are happening that... where we need to, sometimes life is going to flow smoothly and easily, and sometimes we're going to be diverted from our course. Sometimes we're going to have obstacles, but just go with the flow. Don't be upset because I couldn't go this way. Like, it's like, okay, there may be another way to get to where you're going to, but you just may flow a different way down this river to get there. There's a certain amount of surrender, and that's, of course, of what we're aware of. Like, yeah, there's a certain degree of this is how things flow. The advice card, and I apologize, I feel like it's starting to get loud out there now because they're already starting to work on the road. But, so the understanding card, okay? And this is the bird trying to get out of the cage, but the cage is actually open. This is the understanding that you have always been free, okay? So... and freedom, as I've said, though, sovereignty and freedom take some work. They're not something that is easily, it's not just something, free means that now everything's going to be done for me. It's actually kind of the opposite. It means you're kind of, now you're free to do things your own way. And the outcome card here is new vision, literally what I just said, looking at things from a different perspective, Hanged Man card, trying to see something in a very different way, from a different perspective and a different point of view. So, so anyway, that's my reading for today. And that was the thought that came to me. It is getting loud out here now, so normally I try to take this till about 1:15, but I'm gonna stop here right at 7. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow morning. Take care.